It's time for another Dirt Daily, and I'm back in the shop working on the Flatfender. The Flatfender is coming back together. I've had a bunch of components that I've changed on it, and I had this whole fender removed and fixed the frame, put an alternator on, put an air cleaner on. Today I want to get this fender back on and mount some electrical components that I had kind of mentioned in the past, but I've kind of got most of them together now. So I figured it's time for another video. Today's video is brought to you by ARB. ARB has been a great supporter of the channel, and they have a brand new product called the Slide Kitchen. The Slide Kitchen basically mounts in the back of your SUV or maybe your truck, and it slides out of a drawer system, and it has a full kitchen in it. It has a stove that runs off a propane tank, has a cutting board, there's a spot for your fridge freezer, and let's be honest, overlanding, which is super popular, is basically going to some far off exotic spot and eating. So if you can bring a whole kitchen along, then you could eat better food than what I usually eat on the trail, which is like peanut butter and jelly rolled up in a tortilla. That being said, I like cooking. I'm definitely not the best cook. I have a whole section on my channel called In the Kitchen with Fred, where I make random food things that I've figured out. I don't know if I'm a very good chef, but I do know that I like to eat. And in order to eat, you got to know how to cook, or you got to just pay other people to cook for you. So that being said, check out this new thing from ARB. ARB, you've probably heard of them before. They're from Australia originally. They're known for their ARB air lockers. They have bull bars. They have a full line of suspension for a lot of different vehicles under the Old Man Emu name, not Emu, like I said before, and was reprimanded by some Australian viewers. It's Old Man Emu. And they have a ton of overlanding stuff, from rooftop tents to roof racks to awnings, and now the Slide Kitchen. So check it out in case you are looking for a way to turn your SUV into even more overlandy camping adventure truck. But today's little adventure truck is the Flatfender. This is a fuse panel that I mentioned trying to track down, and I finally found one. And I'm going to put the fender back on, hook all these wires back up, install this, and kind of explain how it's going to work. Probably not going to rewire the whole Jeep today. I'm just going to rewire a little bit of it, but you got to work on these projects all the time to get them done. Chip away at it, and today's project is put all this back together, and maybe we can crank it over again like we had it running before. All right, let's get to work. If you've been following along, the wiring, the starter solenoid, and this big maxi fuse, and the fuse panel that I want to install all mount on the inside of the fender. This is the fender, and the fender is held on with 3 bolts across the front, which go right along the inside of the grill, 2 bolts that run into the frame right here in the threaded holes. There's another kind of homemade bracket on the back that also goes to a threaded hole in the frame in the back here. And then there's 3 bolts that screw into the tub along this surface. Those also have threaded holes in nut certs behind there. And then down here on this little step, which I don't really, I mean, everybody uses it as a step. I'm not really sure that I would recommend it because they're never really strong. There's another nut and bolt, yes. There's another nut and bolt on the back of that, or that holds all that together. So this is going to bolt in like right back here where it was. I have figured out that this tub has a lot of red paint underneath army green paint, underneath what looks like maybe some sort of primer. I don't know what color this thing originally was. It sure looks like it was originally red, but I kind of love this kind of mossy green color that it has now. So I'm not going to really go back to red. I have another red Jeep. So, but just as you have all the panels apart, you can see where they fit together. There is definitely some red paint there. First project is the grill. The grill had 3 kind of captured square nuts on these brackets behind here. This bottom nut, captured nut, is the one that broke the bolt off in, and I had to kind of pry it out to get it apart. The top one also has the bolt broken off in it. The middle one is fine, but I'm gonna have to dig this one out and replace both the top and the bottom one with just a normal nut and fastener. I could put a square nut in here, push this back, weld it into place, but I think it's just going to be easier to just take this little bracket, break it all the way off out of the way, and just use a normal nut and washer and bolt to hold this all together. I'm back. I had to run to town to buy fasteners. I always have to go buy fasteners. I have in the corner of my shop this cubby system with a whole bunch of hardware and drawers that are labeled for different hardware. Doesn't matter how much hardware I have, I'm always going to need a fastener that I don't have. Turns out the 3 bolts that run into the side of the frame on the Flatfender are all fine thread 3/8. Didn't have that, didn't have the right length, didn't have the right thread. And all the other bolts I decided to upgrade. I'm doing grade 8 because I always do grade 8 for some reason. And I had little 5/16 bolts for all the bolts that run down the grill and down the side of the tub, but I didn't have lock washers and flat washers in 5/16. This is how it is. So you go to town to get one thing, and then you also stop and get a coffee. And that's what takes forever to work on a project. But it was good. I got to go see other humans, which is hard to do when I spend so much time in the shop. All right, let's get back to putting this thing together. All of the, let me just drop everything on the floor. All of the threaded holes in the frame and in the tub, like the captured nuts that are already in there, I'm gonna put some anti-seize on because I don't want them to gall up when I put it together. All the other holes, I'm just gonna put a nut on the back, so it should be fine. I'm gonna use lock washers and flat washers to help support the fender onto the tub. So, now we will put this fender on. I'm going to start with the one right here in the middle. There it goes. That guy started. I have the 2 bolts in the frame. There's another bolt back here in the frame. That is not a factory bracket on the back. I don't know if there was supposed to be a bracket there and it was lost, or that somebody just added that down the road. But you're probably gonna want it. And then I'm gonna grab hardware and just start out here with this little step. Get that guy lined up. That one I'm going to put a nylock on instead of a lock washer. Good, that one's started. This is the setup I'm using for any of the holes that have either an old captured nut or threaded frame hole. It's a lock washer, then a flat washer, then some anti-seize so that it doesn't gall up. The flat washer grabs more of the fender. The lock washer keeps it from loosening up. The anti-seize keeps it from galling up. So if I can get this front one in. And then for the other ones that don't have a nut on the back side, I'm just using 2 flat washers and a little nylock. Why a nylock instead of a lock washer? I don't know. It just seems to work better. And again, I'll say it again, don't run all the bolts all the way tight until you get all of them started. 3 bolts on the grill, 3 bolts on the frame, 3 bolts in the back of the fender, 1 out here on the step. Fender is back on. I set the battery back in here. I need to make a tie down for this so that it doesn't bounce around and fall into the alternator. Battery cables are ready to be hooked back up. I put the starter solenoid back on the fender and wired it back in. I put this little inline fuse. That's the big inline fuse that runs up to the ignition switch. So that's all hooked back up and bolted back into place. These yellow wires are for this starter switch button, the one that's kind of, it just cranks over the engine if I want to test anything in the engine bay. I really don't need this anymore. I could probably remove this completely, but until the thing's running and driving, I'm going to just leave it there in case I need to diagnose something. I guess it's time to figure out the fuse panel. Now it's time to install the fuse block. What is a fuse block? What do we care? Why do we have fuses? Do Jeeps need fuses? Well, this is the type of fuse that I'm going to use on this Jeep. These are little blade fuses. They're easy to find. You can get them at like every auto parts store. You can get them at gas stations. They've been using these for years. And if you look down in there, in the middle, there's a little tiny wire. It's like a little upside down U. And what that does is that will, this one's actually rated at 30 amps. You can see the 30 on the end. If that gets more than 30 amps running through that little tiny wire in the middle, that wire will break. It will get too hot and it'll melt. And what that does is that protects your wiring harness. So the power is running from the positive side of the battery. It goes through that fuse, then it goes to the light switch, then you grab the light switch and the wire runs through the firewall down to the headlights. And that wire that's running through that firewall hole doesn't have a grommet because you couldn't find the right size, and you're like, yeah, it'll be fine. And you're banging down the trail, and that wire is going, and it's cutting through the insulation on the wire on that sharp hole in the firewall, and you're not paying any attention. And then you've been on the trail all day because your buddy overheated and your other buddy lost a wheel, and you didn't have any problems because your Jeep's perfect and you're just cruising along, and it's like starting to get dark, and you're like, all right, I'm gonna lead these guys back to camp. And you reach down and you grab the headlight switch and it goes poof. And if you don't have that fuse, that wire where it is going through the firewall and chafing the insulation off will cause a short, and that short will make heat, and that wire will start to melt because it's overheating. And then when it starts melting and smoking and making a lot of heat, the other wires that are wrapped up with it will also start to heat up and melt. And the next thing you know, your wiring harness is all melted and your headlights don't work and your other stuff isn't working. And now you're the guy that's causing the group to get back to camp after dark. But if you have this fuse in line and you pull that headlight switch, your headlights will go poof, and they'll go out, but it won't make a fire. It won't make the smoke come out of your wires. It'll just make that center section of that fuse pop. And then you'll go, well, why'd that happen? And you'll grab another 30 amp fuse and you'll put it in there and you'll turn the headlights on again and poof, it'll happen again. And then your buddy will go, well, wait a second, there's definitely a problem because you're blowing fuses. So rather than put a third one in, grab your flashlight and follow the wiring harness and be like, oh, right here, where there should have been a grommet, the wire has rubbed against the tub and rubbed a hole in it. So grab some electrical tape and tape it up. And maybe, I don't know, put a piece of cardboard or something around it. Make yourself a grommet out of whatever piece of rubber you can find. And then put a new fuse in, pull the light switch, and the thing works. When you get home, fix that mess on your wiring harness because you have the possibility of a short. And when you do fix that mess, put a grommet in that hole. So the whole idea is that the fuse will protect everything and it will be the thing that blows first. And then you can find the problem. Did Jeeps always have fuses? No, I think they originally had circuit breakers, which would like click and they would like, basically if they overheated, they would disconnect and then sometimes they would reconnect. I don't know the exact type of circuit breakers that they used on World War II Jeeps, but the nice thing about these types of fuses and these fuse blocks is you can get them anywhere. You can get them at the gas station. Your buddy probably has 3 of them in his pocket that he forgot about. You throw a bunch in the little toolbox underneath the passenger seat. You always have fuses handy. I'm going with a specific type of fuse block to hold the fuses. This is from a company called Blue Sea, which I assume means it's for boats. And this is a split ST blade split bus fuse block. And what's cool about this one is it actually has 3 different sections. There's the upper section, which is has a little negative sign up here, might be hard to see. That is a ground section. Why would you need a ground section? Well, on boats, a lot of them are made out of fiberglass and wood, and if you're running power to the headlight or boat light, you need to run a ground all the way back so that it makes a circuit. On a car, an old Jeep, a lot of times the body and the chassis and the engine is all grounded, so you don't need to run a second wire. But it's good to have, especially if you want a really clean circuit. Like I'll probably run a ground wire all the way down to the fuel gauge so that I know I have a good circuit on the fuel gauge, because the fuel gauge always seems to act wonky. And then the other 2 sections are kind of cool. There's an A positive section and a B positive section. These are your 2 sections for your accessories. And like I'm gonna do A positive will go to this blue wire. This is the blue wire that runs to the accessory side of the ignition switch. Remember when we did the ignition switch install? And there was this extra blue wire. That gets power when the key is either turned 1 notch left to the accessory position or over in the run position. So the idea is that whatever accessories are running off of that blue wire are only getting power when the Jeep is running, or if you turn it left to accessory. What would those be? Well, that would be fuel gauge, voltmeter, maybe the horn. Like everything else, you're probably going to want it to turn on at all times, like your headlights, like your brake lights. Other than that, there's not really a whole lot on this Jeep. So the way that's going to work is that blue wire will come up here to the A terminal, this little A positive, I think you can see it in there. And then that connects down through each of these slots, which will hold a fuse. So let's grab this 30 amp, which is overkill for the fuses or the gauges, but that gives you the idea of what it would look like. And then power will come down, go through that fuse and out this little terminal, and from that terminal we'll run a wire into power the gauges. The other 2 gauges I didn't mention, the temperature gauge and the oil pressure gauge, they are mechanical on this. They don't even need a fuse. They'll probably need a fuse for like the light on them, like all the gauges, but you don't need there's no power running to the oil pressure or the temp gauge. Just power for voltmeter and fuel gauge. Speedometer also no need for power because it's just run off of a cable down to the transfer case. In this lower section, that will be the section that'll have a wire that goes to this bottom terminal, B positive, B plus, and that will run to battery plus. Seems pretty, I'm sure they just marked them as A and B, but for me, accessory and battery seems like the easiest way to separate this. So I'll have a wire running here, I'll have a wire running there, I'll have a ground wire running there, and then each of these terminals will run out to the accessory. You don't need to run a ground to most of your stuff because it's all gonna ground through the body, the chassis, and the engine. So the next step is to find a spot for this. I've decided it's going to go right here on the inside of the fender. The only problem with that spot is if there's a torrential downpour, you could get water running underneath it and get some humidity in there. I'm not really too concerned. Maybe I could put like a piece of rubber over it that kind of lays over it so that if there is water, it'll run around it and not run into this. But at the same time, it's either there or up underneath the dash, and under the dash you're going to kind of have to get all convoluted. The idea is let's make this thing easy to work on if I have to. This kit from Blue Sea also comes with some little tiny stickers. so you can label what each terminal or what each circuit is. Anything else in this instructions that you need to know? It says a max voltage of 32 volts. We're going to do 12 volts. Amperage maximum operating is 30 amps per circuit. We're probably going to be under that for almost everything except for maybe the headlights. And 100 amp per block total. So I think we are good to go. Let's mount this thing up and find a spot for it right there. Drill some holes, put some bolts in, and we'll have one more thing done. All right, fuse box is going to sit right there. Unfortunately, like yesterday, I have hardware, but I don't have the right parts. I have 1024 locking nuts and 1032 machine screws, and they're too short, so I need them a little bit longer, or I need different, I just need stuff I don't have. All that stuff I have over there is not the stuff that I need to put this right on here. So I'm going to run to town while the battery charges for the drill and while the battery charges for the camera and maybe I'll get a coffee so that my battery doesn't burn out either. All right, we'll be right back. I went to town, I bought a bunch of hardware and I got another coffee so that I could get some work done. And I came back and I drilled 4 holes in this, and this is going to live right there. When you're doing stuff like this, make sure you double check what's behind the fender. Also, don't get really long bolts that are going to stick into the fender, because if the tire turns and it catches one of those bolts, it could damage the tire. It could rip the bolt out and damage your whole fuse panel. I'm going to put a little fender washer, big fat washer on the back side, so that everything is tight. I thought about adding a piece of rubber, like this. I thought that if I put a piece of rubber, cut this down and put it under the fuse box, and then this flipped over, kind of protect it from the rain. And then I was like, that's dumb. That's like totally geeking out, over-engineering something that really doesn't need it. Which, I mean, I can't knock my buddies that do that. Actually, I can make fun of them all I want. But I just was like, you know what, I probably don't need to add a splash guard to the inside of the engine bay. If there's water getting splashed there, it's probably also close to getting splashed into the air intake, which is a problem. All right, let's get some wrenches and tighten this down. This is looking pretty good. This is gonna live right here. And we will add stickers to the cover eventually. But first, so this blue wire is gonna come right up here and attach to that terminal right there. So we kind of lay it out here so it's looks like it'll fit in there nice and clean. And then I will come in with my cutters and snip that off. Come in here, strip the wire. And now I will find a ring terminal to go on so I can put that right there. I'm gonna pull this yellow thing off, throw that away. Then this is how I do this. Take some heat shrink, slide it over. Take the terminal, slide it on. See how there's like a seam in the top of that? I take these pliers, which I really like. They have a little nub, and then they have a little concave part. I put the nub on the bottom, and then I crimp it. So you can see the nub's in there. This crimped over, that's good and tight. And I'll slide this up on. Grab a little torch. You could use a heat gun if you have one handy. Try not to overcook this heat shrink. I put way too much on. Come on, keep running. There you go. That's going to go right there. I'm going to route this wire down here, take this bolt off, or this nut off. Drop that on, tighten that up. What size do we think that is? I bet it's 10 millimeter. Tighten that down. And that is wired. That blue wire comes from the ignition switch. So now we're going to send a red wire, a power wire, from this probably down to this starter side of the starter solenoid, the power side, and that will be what feeds. Or the other option would be to run it off the opposite side of this mega fuse, but everything is coming off of this is going to be fused, so it can probably come right from here. So let's find a nice big fat red wire to run from there to there. Once again, there's a split. Put the curved part above the split. Put the nub part in the bottom. Squeeze like crazy. Nub goes in there, locks the wires in, slide over the heat shrink to help hold it all together even more. Give her some heat. And you have your wire, feed wire, that's going to go from here down to the starter solenoid. Come in here, we're going to back this off. I'm going to back this off. And right there. Lock washer. I feel like this fuse panel turned out perfect. I have a big heavy red wire that's running down to the battery side of the starter solenoid, and so it's basically directly to the negative or positive terminal on the battery. I have this blue wire that runs over to the wiring loom and goes up to the accessory or run position on the ignition switch. And then I have a black wire that runs down to the ground where the starter solenoid bolts to the fender and also runs up to the negative side of the battery. So all of this should be ready to go. If I put the battery terminal on, I should get full-time power at the lower half of the fuse block, and I should get ground at this very top half. The middle section, if I reach inside there and I turn it to accessory, I should get 12 volts at all of those. So let's test that. Battery is on. Power probe is on. Lower half all has 12 volts. Middle section has none. Upper half, or upper third, has ground. Let's walk over here and turn this to accessory. Now this middle section all has 12 volts. Perfect. I put a bunch of fuses in the fuse block just as placeholders. I don't know that these are the right sizes. From what I understand, to determine exactly what size fuse you need the wattage of the accessory, you need the voltage of the system, in this case 12 volts, and then that'll give you the amperage. And then you want to multiply that by 125% or 1.25. So say you have a 60 amp headlight and it's a 12 volt system, you divide 60 by 12, that gets you 5 amps. Wait, and say you have a 60 watt headlight, 12 volt system, you divide 60 by 12 and you get 5 amps. Then you multiply that by 1.25, or 1.25, and that gets you about 6.25. So you really need a fuse that's somewhere between 5 and 6.25. But you're gonna have 2 headlights, so that's all gonna be bigger anyways. At the end of the day, you can probably look up online what the headlight system would use on a Jeep. And since we're replacing a lot of this, you would probably just find it that way. But if you have a power outlet, cigar lighter or whatever, stereo, whatever junk you put in your Jeep, you can figure out from whatever the component is what your voltage or what your amperage of fuse should be. So I'm pretty stoked. This thing turned out good. It's nice and clean. It sits right here out of the way. And should we start the engine? I think we should start the engine. We haven't started it in a while. We've been doing stuff. I still have no cooling system. The alternator is installed, but not really tight. So I'm just going to take this belt off completely so that it doesn't get screwed up inside there. Battery terminals are sitting on there, not super tight. Let's make engine noises. That'll make us feel good, and then we can wrap this video up. Double check that that is in neutral, and let's crank the key. It's been a while since we've done this. We added an air cleaner. We haven't had fuel running through the carb in a while. Come on, little Jeep. Ooh, it's gonna start this time. I can feel it. All right, I'm gonna smoke us out. That's it for this Dirt Daily. We put in a fuse panel, we put the fender back on, the Flatfender runs again. There's like just, all I gotta do is the cooling system, and I haven't checked the brakes. I don't know if it's gonna go into gear, but it all, you know, it's just 1,000 more things to do. But did you hear it run? The thing runs so good. All right, that's it for this Dirt Daily. We'll see you guys next time. Oh, don't forget, go check out arbusa.com. Go to their website. They sell all types of stuff. If you don't have a flat fender, but you have like a Land Cruiser, Land Rover, some sort of overlandy pickup truck, and you're looking for a kitchen, check out the Slide Kitchen. I probably won't put one in this Jeep. But if you get one and you go camping and you're cooking something good, let me know, and maybe I'll come eat dinner with you. We'll see you guys next time.